Hello, Scott Hebner here. I'm the Principal Analyst for AI here at theCUBE Research. Thank you for tuning in to the Next Frontiers of AI podcast. This is episode number 16. Our goal to partner with industry pioneers to explore the latest developments in the transformational world of AI. With innovation cycles moving at warp speed, staying up to date is more important than ever. And we hope we're helping you do just that. Today, I'll be joined by Christophe Bertrand, the Principal Analyst for Cyber Resiliency, Data Protection, and Data Platforms here at theCUBE Research. Together, we'll unpack a reality across the enterprise landscape. AI progress is hitting a wall, not because technology limitations, but because of trust, transparency, and compliance shortfalls. While data-driven, AI-guided decision-making promises to transform businesses in every industry, many organizations are now pausing deployments due to inaccurate data governance frameworks, rapidly evolving regulatory landscape, more cyber threats, a whole bunch of different issues. Our research suggests that there are 4 key challenges that enterprises need to tackle. One is they need to identify and classify trusted data in a much more effective way. 2 is they have to scale governed data across the entire enterprise and all the functions that need access to it. They have to create explainable, auditable AI and agentic systems that essentially open up the AI black boxes. And they have to mitigate risk due to this ever-changing, ever-evolving global regulatory landscape that we're all living within today. Our goal today is also to set the stage for an exciting summit that will be broadcasting on September 27th, 2025. theCUBE's Governance and Compliance in the Age of Data and AI Summit. And again, this will be on September 27th. More on this as we go through the podcast. So with that, let me bring up Christophe. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Scott, how are you? Thank you for having me.
You bet. It's always good to see you. We've been doing a lot of talking and research together. I think we're bringing our areas together, which I think is going to be exciting. You had set the stage here for all of us by running such a successful summit. When was it, back in January, right? The Cyber Resiliency Summit?
Exactly. And we also ran research out of it as well as a sort of follow-up item. And well, surprisingly, there may be some AI data points that we'll discuss a little later today.
Yeah, and what was it, like 350,000 views, somewhere in that range? Very well attended.
Yeah, we had lots of viewers. I mean, yourself got quite a few, pretty much in that same range for the Agentic summit as well. So yeah, we're getting a lot of eyes, and it's great to run these summits. More importantly, I think what we do is we bring together industry leaders, thought leaders, and really present for the viewers a 360 view of a specific topic. So that's also, I think, what we'll be doing in the September timeframe.
Yeah, and you mentioned the AI Agent Builder Summit. We're actually running an encore production of that on June 25th. So I encourage everyone to go out and see that. And Christophe, you have another summit coming up next week too, don't you? The week,
absolutely. We'll be, yeah, exactly. Data protection and AI, and I think we'll be talking about it at the summit together. So thank you in advance for joining us for an analyst angle at the summit. Yeah, I mean, again, everything is about AI these days, but I think there's a lot of confusion and a lot of issues that come up, as you suggested. And more importantly, AI is sort of this multifaceted technology that is both your enemy, your attacker, in the context of cyber resilience, can be your friend as well, as you build it into your solutions to be more automated, more productive, leading in time to more operationally efficient with agents. At the same time, I think the AI infrastructure itself needs to be protected. So you get sort of two sides of the same coin, and more importantly, you're right, data and trust. How do we trust what we're getting out of this?
Yeah, after talking to probably 100 different companies over the last 6 or 7 months, and plus just my experience at IBM when I was in their data and AI business unit, the advice you get from everyone when it comes to AI is it starts with your data. It's the bloodline of AI. There's no AI without an IA, an information architecture, and so having the governance and the compliance and the transparency and the access to the data is more important, perhaps, to get off to a good start with AI than just doing AI, right? And so I think what's great about what we're doing here is that we're bringing our research together, our thoughts, all the conversations we have in the marketplace, and we're going to run that summit on September 27th. That's going to bring it all together. I think it's going to be exciting. But anyhow, we'll kind of get into some of the things that we think are key here, and we'd love to hear from everybody to help us shape the summit. So Christophe, let's start with this research that we here at theCUBE Research pulled together, which, let me kind of just explain this chart and get your thoughts on it. The blue bars are showing the estimated generation of new data, from 2025 through 2030. So you can see it grows dramatically, right, over that time period as we become more and more data driven. The red line is the projected amount of trust that business users and executives have in the output they get from their data and from their AI system. So today, only 38% fully trust what they're getting from data and AI. And if we don't do something differently here, it looks like it's projected to go all the way down to 18% by 2030. So this is one of those deals that say, I think we got to do something a little bit differently. Otherwise, we're going to have a problem becoming data-driven, AI-guided. Thoughts?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, it said zettabytes. That's a lot of data. Let's start with that. And that was just new data you were showing. So a couple of points for our viewers. I believe that a lot of this data will be generated by AI itself. There's already a lot of data being naturally generated, a lot of IoT stuff, lots of stuff. So I think that's one aspect. So it immediately brings up a question of how you're going to store all of that, which is something I will be exploring and protect all of that. I'll be exploring that actually in my upcoming summit. And believe it or not, we'll talk about tape. Why not? Because where do you think that data is going to go? But we'll talk about that later. The other point is, this is just new data. So this excludes the existing zettabytes of data that are already in the infrastructure. And what we know for sure, and again, we'll have more research in the future to demonstrate that a lot of the actual data that is in existence today isn't structured and it's not being classified. So, okay, you want to do AI, that's great. You need data that you can trust. That means you need to know what is in the data, that you actually can use it, that it is correct, etc. So just looking at the baseline data you have in your environment, do you even know what you have and where it is? Is it classified? Do you have the right to even use it because of personal data or PII, depending on the terminology you want to use, depending on the compliance? And that's just getting started. And then, of course, you may start transforming the data, adding value to it through a number of mechanisms. Again, how is that governed? And as you start looking at this wave, this tsunami of data, no wonder that people aren't going to trust that, the results. And that's hoping that the AI processes themselves, in time agents, do not hallucinate, do not create or destroy some valuable data in the process. So that's why you said, yeah, the AI is sort of hitting a wall. I mean, it's not a wall. It's a very, 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 sort of wave that's going to destroy everything if you don't pay attention. And that's really what we are trying to explore in our various summits. I mean, between what you've done around agentic AI, what I'm doing around cyber resiliency, data protection, and what we're going to do around governance and compliance. I think there's a lot to cover, but it is doable. There is a method to the madness. I guess we'll share that in a minute.
Yeah, there's a ton of pioneers out there delivering new solutions. Some of the big guys are doing a lot of interesting things, a lot of research and development going on. I think everyone knows that this needs to get solved, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And you're right on the data layer, because if you look at the AI that's predominantly in use today, it is basically helping to create predictions and automate tasks, create content, do all the things that we're familiar with based on your data. It basically uses past data to help predict the future or to help automate a repeatable task. Where this gets more interesting at the AI layer is when you start getting into the world of agentic AI and AI agents, because they're going to do more than just predict. They're supposed to make judgments, help you make decisions, problem solve, and even act autonomously. And so you just think about the consequences of that, right? You start to make business critical decisions, not just a productivity tool like generative AI. And so the stakes are going to go even higher. And this is some more research that I uncovered. It was actually from Identity and SalesPoint, that 96% of people that are developing AI agents, they're worried about the inability to audit and govern these agents, especially when they're wired together into workflows and systems. And how do you maintain compliance controls? And how do you ensure accountability to some human being if an agent's going to go off and do something? What credentials do they have? And can you trace it? And so, there's a layer of data, there's an AI model layer, and then you got this agent layer that's now coming on the scene here. And I think, Christophe, again, this is going to get out of control soon if there's not some real focus on addressing it from the get-go.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And I think, you have to know what data you have. You have to make sure it's usable, and then you're going to have agents running around. But agents, let's think about the term. It's a term that's used in legal frameworks. It's used in commercial frameworks. An agent is a representative of you or your organization. And what you're describing is really how I would evaluate an employee. So an agent should be like an employee. That implies access to certain things or not, certain behaviors, and of course, a certain type of performance. And right now, I think what we're seeing is very nascent. We see some, mostly in the SaaS world, or organizations that are pivoting heavily towards being, sort of agent focused. But it's funny, I was just reading a post earlier that, well, maybe there's a lot of rebranding, maybe some of those processes that are pretty obtuse right now in order to get ROI, pretty limited, may not be that efficient, especially in CRM type of environments. But it's going to get there. I mean, it's only a matter of time, and it's going to go faster than we all think. So yeah, this, I think, compounds. I think what you're showing here, Scott, is we know we have a data issue. Okay,
right?
No question about that. We have a compliance issue because of the data issue. And now we're going to have an agent issue that's going to compound everything else in the process. So there are some things to fix and to pay attention to.
Yeah, then that gets you into another challenge around all this, which is the regulatory landscape. And even, I know here in the United States, a couple of years ago, there's a guy, Mark Strauss, that works at Proof Analytics, and he got me information on this. In the state of Delaware, there was a fiduciary law that corporate officers can no longer hide behind AI on why they did something, right? They're personally accountable. And so there's going to be even a tops down push to say, I got to understand why this thing is doing it. How sure are we we're not breaking any policy or regulatory? And, so it's going to get much more interesting. Like I think you're pointing out here is we're adding layers and layers to the challenge that you got to get under. And I know, the subject, one of the big parts of our summit on September 27th is going to be regulatory compliance. This landscape is crazy, right? So I went out and just did a little bit of research, and, there's over 1,000 distinct regulatory regulations that span 69 countries. So if you're operating globally, that in itself is a challenge. And it's growing 21% each year, or at least in 2023 to 2024. So there's more and more regulations that are coming up, not to mention the ones that are changing. And just to give you some, information just in the United States as an example, at the federal level in 2024, a record number, 59 new regulations were issued by various federal agencies in 2024 related to AI. That's pretty incredible. Then if you look at this, the states, legislators in these states have been debating 700 AI related bills, resulting in 34 of the states actually issuing new regulations. Globally, 75 countries have mentioned AI in their regulatory policy measures or legislature, which again is kind of bringing this to a global environment makes it even more challenging. So we're going to have to really get underneath this on the 27th, Christophe.
Yeah, it is very complex, and people think, oh, it's GDPR and stuff like that. Well, that's one aspect. Now you have AI being regulated, and it's interesting because you hear a lot of politicians, fighting okay, I want more regulation, or I want less regulation. Okay, pick your side. I don't care. The net is this: you're operating globally. It doesn't matter. You can deregulate all you want in your state, even in your own country, even in the first economy in the world. You're going to be bound by other countries' regulations, and that's going to be what prevails, whether it's for compliance on data, very likely, and also for processes and how you manage AI in general. So I think the problem is of a global nature, and there's going to be maybe the lowest common denominator is going to be what you have to really design for, because at the end of the day, if you're operating globally, that's what you're going to have to work with.
Right.
So that's my take.
Yeah, and it looks like, unless, I know there's some in the so-called big, beautiful bill and all that stuff that they're pushing, that they're trying to slow the states down on having all these distinct regulatory for data and AI. But if you just look at 34 of them, so even if you're just operating primarily in the United States, you got to deal state by state, which makes it,
right.
So, I can only imagine how complex it's going to be. The other thing I uncovered here was a survey by Compliance Insights. And so this is 2025. And so I kind of summarized it here. So on the left-hand side, it's saying, how prepared is your organization to handle AI governance and compliance? And you can see only 2% said very ready, very prepared. 36% said somewhat. So what does that get you? 38%? Zero, yeah. So that's what that's saying. On the left, on the right-hand side, then, where it's saying, are you actually using AI in your governance and compliance frameworks so you can manage all this? And I was blown away to see that 0% said yes. 43% said they're actually using AI in their organization, but they're not using it for governance and compliance, right? 50 said outright no, 7 didn't know. So what this is kind of saying, I think, Christophe, is that, there's not a really good feeling that people are prepared for this. Yet at the same time, they're not really using AI to help solve the problem. And as we showed the growth in data and all that stuff and the trust where we are already and all the regulations, how do you solve this without actually applying AI to help you?
Exactly. So that's kind of what I'm exploring too, from the prism of data protection, data resilience in my upcoming summit, because that's exactly what I was saying with two sides of the same coin. You have to manage and deal with AI as a technology, workload, whatever you want to call it, because it's happening, whether we like it or not. Maybe a little slower now, but it's happening, and it will continue. At the same time, you try to make it your friend, because to be able to scale, given the zettabytes you identify in terms of new data, the thousands of regulations coming up, you have to have some intelligence to help you. So I think that's where the confusion, in my opinion, stems for a lot of people. When you say AI, and you're talking, say, to an IT professional or even maybe an AI professional, do you mean AI as in me using AI for my business, in my business? Is it me protecting my AI investment from a data and process perspective, or more like, an expansion of data protection? Is it me making it resilient so that it doesn't get attacked by someone who may really try to take my business down, or inject some prompts, or do whatever crazy stuff they might do? Lots of confusion. So you have to look at it. I think it's almost to the point where we need to coin new terms for around AI, or qualifiers, because you can't just say AI in general. It doesn't mean anything anymore. We're getting to that point in the market where we need to be more specific, more focused on the use cases, more focused on establishing the baseline and the basics for success. And you're right, you're right. No AI without IA, without an information architecture. Well, what does that information architecture look like? What does it have to meet as a set of requirements?
Yeah, I mean, again, the layers are just being added here, and you think of the dimensions here. So automation has got to be a part of the equation here. And like you said, it has to be intelligent, which kind of gets you into using AI to actually help you manage your entire estate, govern it, get trustworthy data, make sure your AI is compliant. Because in the end, the trust is the currency of innovation going forward here, I think. And there's no trust, there's no ROI, and it's something that people really have to focus on. And let's do two more charts here on what's happening in the marketplace. Then we'll jump to where we think the focus needs to be and what sort of frame the summit that we're going to be doing together. So the first one I'm going to do here, which is this is a study by Bain and Company, which I found really interesting. But if you look at the top challenges when it comes to deploying AI across the organization, look at all the red bars. Uncertainty around regulation, quality and accuracy. It's largely about the data and about what the AI produces. Data security and privacy concerns, intellectual property concerns. They almost dominate where the worry is about how do I deploy more and more AI. And what's really happening here is 7 in 10, it was actually 69%, are slowing down new data and AI initiatives due to the concerns about trust and governance and regulatory compliance. Again, I think it's just another proof point out there from a business perspective. That's the wall, right? Maybe it's a little bit of there's some doors in that wall right now, but you can see it's starting to have effect.
Yeah, I mean, the data is very clear from great research that you sourced here. What did it say? Regulations and essentially data-related topics and security, I noted, was number 3, which is really goes back to a broader cyber resiliency sort of posture you need to have for your whole organization. So no surprises there. And this is really why we're seeing, I think, a convergence of markets. And this is really more like the industry analyst speaking here, where the traditional storage backup recovery folks are getting more into data classification, are working a lot more and are integrating cyber resiliency, cybersecurity type of features, and are more heavily now committed to data management because without this sort of infrastructure in place, you can't really go do anything intelligent with the data, which AI would fall in that category. And that's before we talk about anything else around AI being managed itself. So this is, I think this is a very interesting, and by the way, I also noted executive support was actually the last one on the list. So executives are kind of on board. They're not sure about the ROI yet. That was one of the points. But a big issue is the organizations, the companies are not ready with data and compliance.
Yeah, risk, right? It's that whole risk versus innovation trade-off, right? And I think everyone's struggling with that. The other part of the risk, though, and you've done some really great research. Let me bring up one of the slides from it, and maybe you can talk a little bit about what this is saying. What did you find here?
Yeah, so we surveyed actually 600 people around the world as part of our cyber resiliency research, which is very comprehensive, following the NIST 2 model. And we also typically, ask questions about, what people, general sentiment on what's coming up in the next 12, 18 months, which is what this question was about here. And we asked them, okay, what are your major concerns for the next 12, 18 months? And what do we see? Cloud security. So already security is a top one. And number 2, AI-driven cyber attacks right behind. And this was a popularity contest, or I guess pick your poison type of question. But I think it's very, very clear. You can see, by the way, what I was saying earlier, which is extremely consistent with your research. It's all, it's about risk. It's about AI being part of the issue, and it's about data. And I note that, regulatory compliance makes a very nice showing in number 5 here. So, and by the way, I think, when you have encryption or exfiltration, you are in the space of missing your regulatory requirements. So again, different answers are possible. People picked the most sort of popular topics for them, but it tells us where the market's at. 600 people around the world, that's the reality of today. That's where a lot of the people viewing this podcast are probably, thinking is happening in their own organization.
Yeah, what is that U2 song? every city has its good and has its bad. I think the name of the song is Bad. It kind of goes back to what you were saying before, is AI can be both a friend and a foe. So the faux part, I think, jumps out on that chart is that people can actually use AI against you. And you got to be thinking about that. And
Right.
you're the expert in that space that, I haven't thought a lot about or researched around how AI is going to change the threat landscape, but I would imagine it's pretty dramatic.
Yeah, it's already happening, and it's happening in many ways. Actually, I don't want to divulge anything yet, but I know I'm going to be having a great conversation with a speaker who will tell us a little bit about what AI can actually do to deceive you and how to protect against that. So stay tuned. That's coming up in the next summit.
I'll be watching. All right, so let's get into this chain link, as I think we're calling it here, of the things that we think need to become a big focus. And there's probably a hell of a lot more than 4, but Christophe, I think it's fair to say we think these are the 4 big ones. This is what we're going to orient the summit on September 27th around. And it's kind of anchored in this high-level notion that 95% of enterprise data is not AI ready. It's not ready to be used in AI for a bunch of reasons around governance and compliance and privacy. And 90% of the actual AI that's being put into production is not fully compliant. Big problem. So these are the 4 big focus areas. Christophe, you are on the left-hand side. I'm on the right-hand side. Why don't you just talk about the 2 on the left?
Yes. So first of all, as I was mentioning, and you were too, I mean, there's a ton of data, and most organizations recognize that they don't really even know how much data they have and where it is, and there's so much that they have to manage or not manage, that the real challenge, the first challenge, is to really identify and classify all of your data. That means really understanding everything. Not just structured data in databases or whatever the case may be. That's kind of easy. I shouldn't say that, but it is easier when you look at unstructured, which is the vast majority of data these days. That becomes more complex. Then you get into semi-structured, which is what most applications are. There's a database somewhere, a bunch of database powering a bunch of objects and documents and what have you. And a lot of it could be really out of your control from an engineering and design standpoint because it's a SaaS service, but you're still responsible for that. So
Right.
There lies the first step. And let me tell you, it's very basic. If you don't know 100% of your data, you don't control it, you don't own it, you don't classify it, you don't make it compliant. First of all, you're introducing significant business risk. You're not compliant. That means you could lose money. You're probably not very operationally efficient. And there's no way you're going to be able to do AI safely. Now, I say this, there are some parts of or processes that you may be okay with, especially when it's things like, and that's what we're seeing in the first use cases, tech support, knowledge bulletins. I mean, you're not going to have PII in that necessarily. It's a lot safer. But there's always a risk maybe of divulging some trade secrets in the process. So you never really know until you know. So understanding that for compliance, understanding it for governance, which is and for privacy and for security of your business, that's the starting point. And then you can get into the other phases, which is to govern the access to the data, whether it's for individuals or or agents, as a matter of fact. And again, some SaaS vendors are already all in on trying to do that now. A lot of it is marketing, in my opinion, right now. But and I think the efficiency and the results are probably lagging behind. But in time, it will get really good. It's not a question. I'm not doubting that for a second. It's just not quite there yet. And then so yes. So you think about that. I would argue, honestly, across all of these dimensions, we couldn't even draw an arrow that says business risk. That says, so really it's existential risk, because you need to be compliant, and you kind of need to be using AI if you want to survive in this world in time. So I think for a lot of enterprises, it's going to be a big challenge. And I like these 4 categories, if you don't mind showing them again, because I think it allows us to really go talk about specific topics that under each of these come a bunch of technologies and vendors. Some of them are across a couple of them. Nobody can do it all. So as an end user, if you're thinking, or strategist in IT or data, you're thinking about, what do I need to go get? Well, you're going to need all of this. Not one vendor will give it to you. And you're going to have to really think about the use cases that make the most sense, because I do believe, and we'll see what we hear, but I do believe that you can actually go across all of these dimensions, but now it's going to be very limited. It's going to be by maybe business process, not across the board holistically. Anyway, it's just my take, but we will be discussing these topics in our summit.
Yeah, what I like about this is this is sort of a holistic view that says these are really key priorities. There's a lot more you have to worry about, but these are the key ones. And if you can start to solve these, the other things are going to become easier. And I like the idea of talking about the considerations, the best practices that are emerging, the solutions that vendors are bringing to bear, what real businesses are doing in each one of these circles. And you talked about, the two on the left. If you're able to accomplish a good amount of progress and higher quality data, governed, you feel trusted use of it, across the organization, that's going to go a long way to getting your AI to be more trusted. But that's only part of the trust issue with AI. I think the other part is, today, these things are black boxes. They just don't have the transparency and the auditability of how they come up with recommendations and decisions. And, it's one thing to make a prediction. It's another thing to make a judgment or to make a decision, which these agents are supposed to do. Those black boxes have to be opened up. And a lot of the solutions today are really just predicting what they think is happening, not what they don't really know. So explainability, understandability, and transparency of how these agents and AI models operate will become increasingly important. And there are solutions coming on board the market, and we're going to talk about that. And then so you get the data, to a trusted level, or at least a more trusted level. You get your AI to a more trusted level. Then the challenge, Christophe, where it's true for both the data layer and the AI layer, is all this regulatory stuff we were talking about earlier, right? And that's going to be an ongoing sport. That game doesn't end because they're always changing. There's always new ones coming on board. And I think it's going to be a fascinating conversation. We'll have experts in each one of those circles, right? And that's what I love about, bringing everything together, because you've talked to hundreds and hundreds of people within your scope, and I've done it on my scope on the AI, and we're going to bring all this together into a think tank. I think it's going to be great.
Right. And I think another thing that will likely happen, we're starting to see this already happening around cyber resiliency, with this combination of different markets, from traditional security to really colliding or combining with IT, for example, and other dimensions around data management. Those teams are sort of starting to collaborate and work together a little better. I think that here the same thing will be happening. We're probably going to find some disconnects, but also opportunities for organizations to morph in how they approach this notion of compliance data serving a business process or a business outcome. This is the beginning. I'm sure we're going to be talking about this for many, many years to come, but it's also a turning point. And it's a turning point because of the data that's at stake here, because of the regulations, and because of the amount of data and the business pressures we're under. So, we'll see. But I believe that in the next couple of years, we will start discerning some winners in some of these areas on the left-hand side and in my area. And I do believe you already have some interesting players on the right-hand side in your area of the business.
Absolutely.
So we'll see. We'll see what happens. And of course, what we'd like to do with this summit is let's go do a little research. Let's go talk to people. And as we gather all of this intelligence, all of these perspectives, this 360 view, where's the state? What's the state of data governance, data compliance, and AI? Where are people actually? Where are you, the viewers? And that's what we'll try to get to a few weeks after the event.
Yeah, to help give us, insights and guidance for 2026. So why don't you, before we run out of time here, Christophe, why don't you give us a little bit of a brief overview? I think we've talked a good amount about the summit, but how's it going to be structured? It's September 27th.
Yes. So typically what we do with these summits, we will have a live presentation live show with all the experts that will bring around the table, vendors, end users. We've started the conversation, so we don't have the final list yet. It will take a little bit of time. And the idea is that we're going to explore multiple topics around governance and compliance in AI, looking at it from multiple prisms and also providing our perspectives. Certainly both of us as analysts, we may bring a couple of friends from our analyst community as well and from theCUBE research to weigh in and give us their perspectives. But I think what we're going to get is this idea that we want to get a 360 view out of the topic in 2025, of best practices, of leading companies that participate in the summit because they believe it's important. They believe they have the great solutions to support their customers. And really the truth is we want to surround that with market research to really keep the conversation going in 2026 in the following months. And by the way, all of our summits, they're on demand. So you can go look at, of course, yours, the Agentic AI Summit, the Cyber Resiliency Summit. They're all available, so you can get a chance to see how we approach these topics. And it's typically very comprehensive. I can promise you it's not when we have vendors, they're really friends and experts, many of them. We've known them for a long time. They're not pitching their solution. They're really explaining how they can help with technology, what they're seeing in the market. So don't think this is a big webinar with vendors pitching. No, it's really a thorough, double click on a number of topics around these themes that we cover. And I think they've been so well received. I mean, hundreds of thousands of views. So thank you to our viewers, and please keep coming. We love it, and we love your feedback.
Yeah, to check one of these out, go see the ones that we've mentioned. Go to thecube.net and go under past or on demand. And for the ones that are going on next week, that would be the week of June 24th, I think.
It's going to be the 30th. 30th of June, July 1st, when we're running the Data Protection and AI Summit.
Right. And the encore of the AI Agent Builder Summit is on June 25th. But as we go through the summer, you'll be hearing a lot more about the one that we're talking about here for September 27th. So stay tuned for that. And if you're a vendor or solution provider or service provider in this space, contact us for sponsorship opportunities and to participate. We would love to have you. All right. Well, Christophe, I think I think it's time for us to go. I know you have to go for sure. We can go on for hours and hours on this, I'm sure, but I guess we'll have plenty of time to do that when we get to the summit in September. I really appreciate it, Christophe. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. And thank you all, as always, for joining the Next Frontier of AI podcast. I really appreciate you tuning in. Stay tuned for more research and analysis from our team as we dive deeper into what's shaping the future of data AI in business. Visit thecuberesearch.com and siliconangle.com to stay connected and to access all of our AI research in podcasts. We are the leader in news and analysis. Bye for now.